Hello and welcome to another edition of the Angus Update. I am Matt Krenz, I'm the Executive Director of Angus, and to my right I have Mr. Kevin Hollinger, Legislative Director for the Association. Today our topic will be DD-214 for Reserve Component Service members. So Kevin, you've been working this issue for several years. Can you kind of give a brief background on why this topic is so important for our Reserve Component Service members and what we're doing to kind of ensure that this is happening moving forward?
All right, well, the reason we think it's so important is really based on a benefit and how you access those benefits after your career or even in the early portions of your career as you're coming up in age and you start becoming more and more qualified. I think the one thing that we found is that the active duty document, which is the DD-214, is commonly known, it's commonly understood by not only the VA, but by state benefit associations, employers, and other associations for that matter.
Absolutely.
And I think the reason we found that it's so important to get this document is just the ease of access that our veterans need to benefits. And I think that's where this originally came from, the recognition that the training documents that the reservists get, the NGB 22 that we get here in the National Guard, were not fulfilling the need that we had. And they were commonly questioned or misunderstood. And I think that's where it really came from. The history of this legislation has gone on a lot longer than I ever thought it would. I think I started this 2 weeks before I actually moved to DC. My current boss sent me this topic and said, hey, research it, write a paper on it, have it ready before you start day one here. And I really did, and I teamed up with the Angus legislative directors at the time, Scott Bowsam and Daniel Elkins, and downstairs with the legislative team at Naugus and JC Cardinale, and we all teamed up on this, and it seemed like we were the only three working it at the time.
Yep.
And I think throughout the history of this, we've had legislation in the NDAA twice, and now we have two standalone bills in S-1291 and HR 7041.
Absolutely. And I think for a more background, as a legislative priority, this has been a very important topic for Angus for the last several years. As Kevin alluded to, the criticality of ensuring that our Reserve Component Service members have a document that can be used not only when they leave service, but to be able to use a document to show benefits while they're currently serving. For example, to prove eligibility for a VA home loan or things such as that is very, very important. This year, allowing us to have the standalone pieces of legislation in S-1291 and HR 7041 is definitely a positive step forward. But there has been some additional things that have happened just very recently. And Kevin, I don't know if you want to touch on the current policy that came out from DOD just last month.
Well, actually, so let's start with the DOD instruction, and it's 1336.01. Now, I do want to say thank you to Michigan and Katrina in particular, who actually found this, because it wasn't widely distributed. Well, it was widely distributed. It just wasn't,
Disseminated.
There you go. I think that's a better word for it. And I think the team up in Michigan, thank you guys. You guys were on top of this one. I appreciate it. But so the DOD that came out does kind of illustrate a lot of the things that we want to accomplish. It does track early retirement. It does track state awards, IDT time, ADT time. It encompasses all of this into the DD-214. Now, I understand that it comes down on the -1, but essentially that's attached to a DD-214.
Right.
And this does totally encompass your military career, your military service. And stand corrected before somebody gets me later. This is actually a uniform, so it actually now includes NOAA and the UHPHS as well, to bring everybody under the armed service or the uniform services together.
Correct. You know, a big piece with this is, as Kevin alluded to, there's been legislation that's been pushed for the last several years showing the importance. And as a result of that, they kind of nudged DOD to start kind of moving forward and leaning forward when it came down to revamping some policies to ensure that reserve component service members were going to have the ability to get the DD-214, or as that came out within this policy, it's going to be a DD-214-1 that will be very specific for reserve component service members, that will highlight the amount of reserve component time that a service member is using. So there's a couple things that I want to kind of touch on this DOTI. We've recently pushed some information out through our social media that highlighted this. As an association, we're very grateful and very excited that this policy has been implemented. However, there's a few things to be able to highlight or educate you on, so you know when this will actually take effect and who's going to be able to go ahead and get this DD-214-1 moving forward. So Kevin, I don't know if that's something that you'd like to quickly touch on.
Well, I think the 3-year implementation on it, I think originally when we read that, we thought 3 years was way too long. But as you kind of start absorbing this, they still have to design the form, they still have to do it. We think that 3 years as implementation date is probably a pretty good time standard on that. I'm sure they could say, hey, we'll do it within a year and then fail to meet that anyway, so then we're back at 3 years. So I think that was probably a good decision. I think putting a couple of the issues that we have in there, number one, you only get it at the end of your service. We were really hoping to get an earlier document based on the fact that National Guard and reservists are going to use the VA and other programs a lot earlier than our active duty counterparts. As far as when you IST, I think that one's going to be very important as well, that getting it then, which currently the DOTI says you do not get it then.
I think something that's important to highlight with this DOTI is that this directive is a Department of Defense level policy, and as it highlights within this document, there will be guidance that is specifically published by each individual service that kind of dictates how they're going to go ahead and implement this policy through the Army, through the Air Force, through the Marines, through the different uniformed services. They will have their own individual policy on how they will implement this. Moving forward, and why, again, this is a great thing that we have this policy. However, from our association level, we still believe that having legislation passed, whether that be through the NDAA or whether that be through standalone legislation, might still be beneficial. With the legislation we currently have, it is a little more directive as far as stating when a DD-214-1 or document should be issued. And as Kevin alluded to, for us, we believe there are certain other times besides just the end of your service where actually having a document to capture all your military service might be beneficial. A couple pieces to touch on to this legislation is at different periods within your time of service. For example, on an officer, when an officer reaches the rank of 04 or major, they would have a DD-214 issued to them to be able to document the service they had previous to that. So if you look at a traditional time and grade for an individual, that's roughly around probably the 8-year period of when they would have that document. On the enlisted service member, basically once they reach the rank of E4, they would be able to go ahead and have this document initiated. That's based on the draft legislation that is up in Congress right now. So if you take a look at using that document for benefits, the largest concern is we don't want reserve component service members to sign up to serve today, and they're not going to get a DD-214-1 potentially for 20 or 25 years down the road. They need to be able to have a document that allows them to show proof of the benefits they've earned during different portions of time through their military service. So, I believe we're still going to see that legislation moving forward. Well, there's a potential that will pass, and that obviously will kind of dictate or give some changes to the current policy that the Department of Defense has pushed out.
I do want to make one simple correction. So it's 03 in the current legislation. It's 03, and for warrant officers, it's W3.
Okay.
And I think we did that right in line kind of with officer education.
Okay.
So when you finish your captain's career course, E4 is the reason we went with E4 is that's really, that first primary level of NCOES. W3s. That was kind of as they were getting out of that junior level.
Okay.
And I think that's why we went with that. I think that's one important part of the legislation. Another one is if you transfer out of one state into another state or territory, then you would receive it then, along with state or territory, along with reenlistment and extension in the legislation. I think that those three portions are kind of very important to touch base on, and that's why we're still supporting this legislation as opposed to just saying, the DOTI's good enough.
Absolutely.
The DOTI's great, don't get me wrong. We just kind of feel the legislation might be a little better.
No, absolutely. And, not to continue to reiterate on this, but this is a win for Reserve Component Service members. Allowing Reserve Component Service members to get a DD-214 or document is a significant step forward for our service members to help with the benefits. Can you continue to improve on it? You absolutely can. And so as an association, we will continue to go ahead and fight and advocate on behalf of the men and women within the National Guard. This is one of those things that we are going to go ahead and continue to watch. Even though it can take up to 3 years for the implementation of this document, please know that we're keeping an eye on this. We're ensuring that this thing is going to move forward. And we're here to make sure that you get the things that you need to be successful. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to us today. We thank our sponsors for allowing us to have the opportunity to sit here and put on this NGUS update. And we hope to see you again very, very soon. Thank you, everyone.